Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first anniversary webinar of the Gender Lens Initiative for Switzerland. My name is Kaylee Taylor, and I am the Community Manager at Sustainable Finance Geneva. And I want to start by wishing everyone a very happy International Women's Day 2022. We know that right off the top of the hour, it's hard for everyone to get on, but there are a pretty good number here already, so we're going to kick off. But I thought to give people just a few more minutes, we would start with a few fun polls. Well, they're actually a little bit more of a quiz. So you should now see a question on your screen that is, when was the first International Women's Day celebrated? So when did this thing first start kicking off? Okay, I see a couple guesses here on the screen. If everyone wants to guess when it started. Okay. I'm going to show the results in just 1 second. All right, great. I see lots of people logging in. Okay. So the most popular answer was 1975. But believe it or not, the first International Women's Day was actually celebrated in 1911. And that was done in Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and Denmark, and involved over 1 million people. But it wasn't until 1977 that the UN made International Women's Day an official holiday. So for those of you who guessed 1975, you were in the right realm for when it was made official by the UN. But the very first one was 1911. Now, if we go over, I have one more poll for you, and we're going to move over into the idea of gender lens investing. So according to Equileap's newest report, how large is the current gender lens investing industry globally? What size do you think it currently has? Starting to see some answers coming in here. Okay, great. Looking like 30 billion is the most popular answer. Oh, okay, I'm going to close it. The actual answer is 6 billion. So I wish we were at 30 billion. And I think with initiatives like the GLIS, we will get there. But at the moment, according to Equileap, the industry is currently at USD $6 billion. So this warms us up a little bit for this very exciting webinar around the first anniversary of the GLIS. And we're so happy to have you all here. For those of you who aren't familiar with the GLIS is an initiative that aims to drive more financing to gender lens investing in Switzerland, and it's hosted by Sustainable Finance Geneva. And with that, I would like to give the floor over to our Director of Sustainable Finance Geneva, Sandrine Salerno, who will just tell us a few things about the organization and what we aim to achieve. Thanks, Sandrine.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. As Kelly said, I'm the director of SFG. SFG, believe it or not, was the first nonprofit association in Switzerland that did advocacy for sustainable finance. It was 14 years ago when sustainable finance was really a niche. And the goal, the aim of SFG was really to do that niche the new normal. SFG is based, as you can imagine, in Geneva, and it is one of the partners that operated building bridges for 2 editions. We will do so this year also. Building Bridges, the next edition will be beginning of October, from the 3rd to the 6th of October, and gender lens would be, like it was the last edition, one of the thematic SFG and community around SFG try to push forward. So very happy to have you all in this wonderful panel. I'm really thrilled to hear our guest. And as the second pool show us, we have a long way to make gender lens a reality, not only in Switzerland, but also in Switzerland. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much, Sandrine, for those helpful opening comments and setting the context for us. Now we're going to move a little bit into the GLIS for those of you who would like to know more about what we do at the GLIS, both what we've already done and where we're going. And I'm very happy to welcome Tim Raji, who is from Alpha Mundi Group, and he has been the driving force behind the creation of the GLIS and is our current acting chair. Tim is going to walk us through what we've done in the first year and then give us a preview of where we're going over this next year. And I did just want to note for all our attendees that there is a chat function and a Q&A. And if you have any questions or need clarification, please feel free to ask those in the Q&A. I will be monitoring it. With that, over to you, Tim. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. So essentially, the GLIS was born out of a workshop that we convened, we Alpha Mundi and GenderSmart in Geneva in October 2020. It was announced as an intention, the first national initiative of its kind at the GenderSmart Virtual Summit in February 2021. And it was launched as a working group of SFG in March 2021. So I first want to thank Sustainable Finance Geneva for hosting this sort of national initiative. I think it's really wonderful to be hosted by an association that's established its track record for financial innovation for sustainable development. So in terms of the structure of the GLIS, I'm acting as a founding chairman until next year at least. We're very happy that a job posting that we had promoted in recent weeks resulted in a vice president being identified and nominated for the GLIS. This is Sarah Jarry, who's a principal in private equity for financial services and fintech at Responsibility. She has a storied career in impact investing, and we're very fortunate to count her as a VP for the GLIS for the year ahead. If I look at the other committees that we've set up so far, we have an investment solutions committee on which we're fortunate to count on the insights of David Uzoki from the ISD, Maria Vogt from the VIS. VIS is Women in Sustainable Finance, an association headquartered in Zurich. Olga Miller from Spartpers, and myself. And separately from that, we have the Academic Research Committee, the ARCO, on which we have a number of distinguished academic researchers, including Anina Heeler, Raina Gibson, Jessica Spinoza, Vanina Farber, and Alexandra Niesen-Runzi from various universities and academic centers in Switzerland and also Germany. Now, the reason for these two committees is very simple. First, we realized that we lacked consistent and systematic data on the gender lens investing and financing landscape in Switzerland. And that, of course, required rigorous approach to market research. And our ARCO, our Academic Research Committee, has that function. They help us design surveys. They help us collaborate with other researchers. We're, for example, in discussions with Swiss Sustainable Finance to embed gender lens considerations in the next report and possibly on an ongoing basis in their research methodology. The same goes for Tameo for their survey of impact fund managers in emerging markets. And ultimately, we want to see gender lens considerations reflected systematically in most of the leading industry research pieces in Switzerland and possibly even on the international stage. As for the Investment Solutions Committee, of course, if you want to mobilize capital, you need products for that, and the ISCO helps us get there. If you look back at our first year of activity, it's been very dynamic, and I thank all those of you who actively contributed to the different activities. We've held a number of webinars. We have contributed to articles in Swiss press, as well as in the newsletter of SFG, The Bridge. We organized a first gathering of GLIS stakeholders at Building Bridges. It was a great turnout and really good conversations for those of you who are there. Watch the video online. It's still available. And we also produced a report that was launched during Building Bridges with a summary of global trends and some insights on leading practitioners of gender lens investing with data at 30 June 2021. So I think by and large, we're very satisfied with the work we've done. with very little funding, mostly on a pro bono basis and depending on the goodwill of our partners. If we look at the next slide, we can see our work program for 2022. Now we have a number of key partnerships. We are very fortunate to collaborate with the 2X Collaborative. For those of you who don't know this organization, it originated as an association of development finance institutions that were committing to gender lens finance and mobilizing capital, helping define standards for gender lens investing. 2X Collaborative is now formed as an association in the UK and is also open to membership by private sector institutions. It has, I think, been evolving in its scope from an emerging market focus initially to a global one. The GLIS, through its ISCO members, will help 2X establish a label for gender lens products in the course of 2022. We're also working with different research bodies. I mentioned Tameo and SSF. We are trying to pilot a number of surveys related to the gender lens impact of products that claim to be gender lens products. We will be helping or looking at Swiss financial institutions and seeing how their corporate policies, human resources empower women and address gender lens considerations in their governance structure and their corporate policies. And we'll be looking at wealthy women residents in Switzerland. What are their aspirations? What are the hurdles they face when looking to allocate their capital according to their values and vision? These are all pilot surveys. We're still in the stage where we're perfecting the methodology for each of these surveys. They will be running until 30 June, and we hope then to make them more systematic and a wider basis as of either end of this year or early next year. Finally, we're working on awareness events. We have a number of instruments already deployed for the GLIS. One of them is to contribute to the Swiss Sustainable Finance Market Study through a 2-page article. The second one is to have an in-person gathering at the next Building Bridges, which is scheduled for the month of October, first week of the month of October in Geneva. We're collaborating with UNDP to issue a prize to the most impactful SME and emerging markets from a gender lens perspective. The first prize was given at the Building Bridges, or announced at the Building Bridges closing dinner in December. It went to an African renewable energy company. And of course, we'll have a number of webinars where we feature industry standards, where we feature financial innovation and interesting products, because our bottom line here is that you don't need to wait to be able to invest for gender lens purposes. There is a wide range of products that are currently available across multiple asset classes, sectors, geographies, stages of growth and scale in terms of assets. And of course, that is one of the core purposes of today's presentation by Gender Smart. It's the results of their latest survey on that topic. So I think that's really the work program for now for the GLIS. And let me conclude by a call for action, in this case, funding commitments. Alpha Mundi, of course, is stepping forward first with a special commitment of 10,000 Swiss francs to the GLIS for this year. We would be looking for other companies or sponsors to join us in providing a bit of cash to support all the activities that the GLIS has the ambition to run in 2022. So if it's something that you can consider, if you think gender lens considerations are relevant, perhaps even important for your institution or for you personally, please contact Sustainable Finance Geneva to determine if and how you can become a sponsor of the initiative for this year. I'll pass the mic to Suzanne Beagle, who's a co-founder of Gender Smart. She's been a friend and a partner for a long time. She's also been a fantastic catalyst for all things gender smart and gender lens worldwide. So Suzanne, the floor is yours. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tim. It is such a great thing to be here with you today and to get to hear about the whole plan for GLIS over the next year. So I'm going to give some context about Project SAGE. This is a report that we started, Wharton Social Impact Initiative at the Wharton Business School, and me in my hat as Catalyst at Large, started in 2017. And now this is our fourth report. And this is to present the picture of venture capital, private equity, private debt, whether it's structured as a fund or whether it's structured as a permanent capital vehicle. What does that market look like when you have intentionality around gender? And when we started, we were looking at 58 funds, and now we've got hundreds of funds in our universe. And so it's been amazing to get to work with so many fund managers to understand what it is they're doing and where and how. The idea here is to provide insight about how these different funds are approaching what sectors, what themes. Are they providing technical assistance for their investees? How are they focused on, with a gender lens, on entrepreneurs or on customers or on employment? And just to really build the picture of not only what the snapshot looks like today, but also how it's really changed. So I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour. And we hope that as an allocator, you'll use this as a way to think about funds. Many of these funds are still raising. We hope that as an entrepreneur, people will use it as a way to really sharpen their focus and really talk to the fund managers that are right for them. And as a philanthropist or a development actor or someone who's got different kinds of capital, to think about how can you really help these kinds of funds with whatever type of capital you have. And I'd love to hear your questions and your thoughts as I go along. So as I said, it's this global scan. We have 206 funds in the universe, and I think that represents probably about half of what the market really looks like. And we asked people for their numbers through the end of 2020 and through June 30th, 2021. And this is really as an update. We did research interviews with 14 fund managers in our Project SAGE 3.0. We didn't do those interviews in this one, but I would say look at them both. So we changed the slide. The first is to just look again at the universe and how much it's grown. And that's grown in Switzerland, it's grown around the world, and it's grown, I'll talk a little bit about the geographies. Let's keep going. That's from about 123 fund managers. The total capital raised has cleared 6 billion, and that's collectively. And the total capital sought, including that 6 billion, is over 13 billion, almost 13.2. So we can really say that there's a lot of opportunity to place capital. And I wish that we could say that fund managers are raising faster than they were before. I think in some cases they are. We didn't ask this in this study with Wharton, but I know anecdotally that it is still taking more effort than it really should to raise these funds. And I am sure that there is a fair amount of gender bias in that system. If you keep going, for those funds that we're highlighting, there 38% of them are closed and all of the rest of them are raising. And so again, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of need in the market. And these funds raise, on the next slide, are raising from anywhere from several million to 10 million all the way up to $500 million and more. And so anyone who might think that a gender lens fund is something small is definitely not on the right track. A lot of these funds are in the $20 to $50 million range, but we've got 22% that are over 100 million. And then it's such a wealth of funds that are their first fund and they're starting small and they're doing really exciting things. So the diversity in the size of the fundraisers. We asked about, on the next slide, how people define their gender lens. And of course, the first is to advance gender equity and company ownership, so backing women entrepreneurs. But people are looking at companies where it may have been founded by a guy, but it's really got gender equity at the leadership level. It may have been really a focus on looking at this through the whole supply chain and distribution chain. It can be thinking about companies whose products and services really impact the lives of women or women and girls and really pay attention to gender equity. So there are a variety of these different lenses that come into play. If you go to the next slide, the geographic diversity is increasing. So US and Canada is #1 and has been since we started, but Sub-Saharan Africa is number 2, and you might have a fund like an Alpha Mundi, for example, that's investing in Sub-Saharan Africa and LATAM and the Caribbean, but was founded in Europe and the US. So, they'll show up as this is the destination of where their capital is being deployed. If you combine South Asia and Southeast Asia, you're going to get, that gets us into the number 3 slot in 25% of the capital there. But it really is getting more and more diverse, and it's very exciting to see, especially local fund managers from the places that the capital is destined, who are raising their funds and who come from those places and really know those places, as well as seeing fund managers really putting people on the ground or hiring, engaging people on the ground in those places that they're investing, so that they really have the voice of lived experience and they really are close to the market. From an asset class standpoint, go to the next slide. Most of the funds in our study were venture capital, but there are a number that are private equity. There are quite a number of debt funds. 10% are structured now as holding companies or evergreen companies. And I think that's a really exciting trend, that we're not just looking at traditional structures, but that we're looking at structures that are more flexible, that are structures that are revenue-based financing, production financing, invoice financing, and really thinking about how do you take the kinds of capital that these entrepreneurs need and make sure your fund is structured in a way that you can put that capital out. Going on to the next slide, the SDGs, we asked people, what SDGs are you investing in? And I think people might make the assumption that it's about gender equality, but it's about no poverty. It's about water and sanitation. It's about climate. 50% of the funds in here are looking at climate, not only climate action, but looking at life above land and below, looking at life above water and below water, looking at poverty alleviation, and really looking across the different SDGs, and then on the next slide, looking across the sectors. So if you think about the top ones, healthcare, agri, and fintech, but then it goes all the way through, thinking about the care economy, clean tech, food. There's just aging, just a plethora of sectors in which these funds are investing. And I'm really obsessed about climate. So of course, we have at Gender Smart, we have a climate and gender working group. And so we've been picking out the ones that are really looking at both a climate and a gender lens. And if you go to the next slide, just a few quick things about climate and gender. Clean tech, environment, renewable energy, people define these things differently. They are focused in different areas. Go to the next slide. You have climate as a focus in some of these funds, and then you have other funds where climate is part of their core priorities, and you have others still that are climate is one of several strategic components. So I can think about a fund that is addressing needs for healthcare, and they say that some of the things that they're really working on, access to reproductive health, for example, really have a climate impact. Or they're investing in financial inclusion, and they're looking at something like a climate insurance deal, where climate resilience insurance deal for women farmers. And so you've got this blending of priorities that I think is really essential. We also ask about women as venture partners because we want to know who's deploying the capital. So if you go to the next slide, we have a tremendous number of these funds as venture partners. And if you think about the global average, where it's maybe 15% of all venture partners are women, then in the Project Sage funds, you have so much more gender balance and in fund management. And we know that gender balance is really the source of outperformance when you look at venture funds. So one more thing, to go to the next slide, we really wanted to know, how are people tracking their gender performance? And are they, if they're intentional about it as impact investors and sustainable investors, what do they look at? So they're not only looking at who is making the investment, so where are women at the fund manager level, on the investment committee, in ownership, but at the portfolio company, ownership, leadership, employment, supply chains, and then really thinking about customers. And within that, what are the policies and practices that people have around equitable pay, around flexible working, around gender-based violence? Are there sexual harassment policies and things like that? So thinking about the quality of what these companies are really investing in. One more minute here. I want to talk about the ones in Switzerland. So Alpha Mundi Chi Impact Capital and Care Enterprises are the three that we identified from Switzerland. And now, just since we published, there are more that are coming out. And these are funds that are primarily focused on looking in emerging markets. But across Europe, you have a combination of funds that are focused on Europe and then other funds that are really focused on emerging markets. And in some cases, like Nordic Impact Fund, which is based in Denmark, they're looking at what is the linkage between Norway and emerging markets. And I think that's an interesting opportunity to think about as for the Swiss funds. Where can you be looking at impact that is happening in multiple locations? And one thing that I think really brings these three together is a real commitment around what is the impact on all stakeholders and the real intentionality about how they're investing and not only what they're investing in. So to give you, and I think you know about these funds, but they're doing a mix of debt and equity. Although Care Enterprises has now just really announced that they're going to focus on debt. Alpha Mundi, as I mentioned, is in Latin America and Africa. Care Enterprises is in Southeast Asia. And I'm not sure what the percentage of capital is that they've raised from Switzerland or how they're engaging with the rest of the Swiss ecosystem, but I hope that they will inspire others to really follow in their footsteps. So that is a whirlwind tour. I think the big messages here is that there are hundreds of these investment funds around the world. Where is the opportunity in Switzerland? That's one. The second is, and the reason we mentioned Care Enterprises is, because they're working with Bamboo, and so who is based in Switzerland. And so where are the opportunities for you to be starting or launching a fund or helping a fund, investing in a fund, and really bringing your capital to bear to be part of this really growing movement? And then how are you looking at where women are in the picture of managing these funds? And where are you really thinking about who's being impacted and being very intentional? Thank you for giving me this chance to share about Project Sage, and I'm happy to answer any questions or to move on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So thanks so much, Suzanne. This is very groundbreaking, or maybe I should say glass ceiling breaking work, and it's really great to see. I don't see any questions in the Q&A yet, but I am going to open a poll for people to put just a word or two of what really stood out for you in the work that Suzanne just presented. And I have a question. I noticed that the venture capital line on that chart of where the financing was quite a bit larger than the other funds. Is there a specific reason that you're seeing that, or any specific reason that is the case?
We didn't ask this question in Project Sage, but I have, from a Gender Smart perspective, my own perspective on this, which is this is a relatively newer thing for a fund to be explicit about where gender is in their picture. And the people that are starting new funds and starting with a smaller amount of capital are being quicker to really get on this train and to do innovative things, and to really, because maybe they're launching new funds, to be explicit about it, even if they're as a first-time fund manager, which more than 60% of these funds are, wow, to really have that ability. Whereas private equity funds are often more established. They've raised their money already, and they're really thinking, how do I now make a shift? And I got a chance to work with Responsibility over the past year and a half, and they now have really come with one of their funds to be very explicit about their gender lens. But when this research was done, they didn't have time to participate, but they would have been up on this list. And they said, look, in our private equity investing, we really believe that we can get gender smart. We can bring a gender lens into a fund that we've already raised. And I think that's going to be where the next opportunity is to say, whether you have a new fund or whether you have an existing fund, and the 2X Challenge and the 2X Collaborative is really looking at this with their flagship funds portfolio. How can you get gender smart, and how can you really look at, again, who's in the fund management team, where's the ownership, but then in the portfolio, how can you look at leadership, governance, employment, customers, products and service design, policies, as a marker. And I think more and more are starting to be interested in this. I mean, I'm getting calls, and I know that others are getting calls, and 2X is getting calls from people who are saying that I want to do this now. But when we, as we've been tracking this, we just haven't seen as many in that realm that have made that commitment yet.
Amazing. So let me read you some of the things that are coming in from the community here. Year-on-year growth stood out, that it's growing exponentially, that Gender Lens is more than just women in leadership, the huge opportunity, the range of investment strategies and products now available. So I think this is really what's standing out for people. I think we have one more question here that we can do just quickly before we move into the panel. The first question is, what were some cases, like a fund, a structure, or process, that you found particularly exciting or inspiring?
Oh, that's really hard. That's like picking your favorite child. Because of these 206 funds, I am excited about so many of them. And I'll, okay, maybe I will call out a few that have really unusual things about them. One is a fund called Beacon Capital. And one of the things I appreciated is it came out of a fund manager called Patamar, who were doing a fund that didn't have a gender lens. Then they started a fund a small fund that had a gender lens as an experimental portfolio. And they went on to build their fund, their second fund, to be more explicit about gender. But in the process, they learned about all kinds of entrepreneurs that are in Southeast Asia that are doing more kind of normal growth businesses, have a real need for capital, but don't look like the venture capital profile that Patamar was looking for. And so they started something which is doing more appropriate structures for normal growth businesses. And I'm really excited about that. There's another one, Beyond Capital, who have an innovative structure in that not only are they investing in healthcare and financial inclusion and climate, but they are giving a piece of the carry of the fund manager to the entrepreneurs that they're investing in. And I think that is really about being in partnership with your investors and recognizing that it's the fund manager and the entrepreneurs that are really making the change happen and making the growth happen, and that they should share that. And I just think that's really innovative. But I am excited about the ones that are very, very intentional, not just kind of looking at one of those lenses, but looking more holistically at, like I'll say Alpha Mundi, at not only who's in fund management, but really not only who are the entrepreneurs that get it now, but who are the entrepreneurs that they can work with to bring them along and help them get gender smart. And then to really think about the employees, to think about supply chains, to think about customers, and derive the business benefit from it, not just the gender dividend from it, but both of which are super important, and the climate dividend or the financial inclusion dividend or the healthcare dividend, whatever they might be looking at in their funds and agri consumer products. And so it's such a joy. I have such a privilege to get to look at so many of these funds, and I could talk all day about, the ones that have a really good thesis, a really good approach to how they deploy capital, a great approach to how they're doing technical assistance, a great approach to how they're literally helping people get more women into governance, or how they're literally helping people find talent. It's just very exciting to me.
Amazing. And that is the most perfect segue into our panel, because we have Care Enterprises with us today, who we know has a very interesting technical assistance way of approaching this. But anyway, Suzanne, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on with us. I know this is probably their busiest day of the year, International Women's Day, but we really appreciate it. And now I'd like to ask Aisha Khanna and Rachel Whitaker to turn their cameras back on to come on for our panel discussion. Thanks so much.
I could stand.
They're perfect. And Rachel, are you there? I think you came on and then we're off again. There we go. Great. So now on to the panel. So I am very happy to have Aisha Khanna, the CEO of Care Enterprises, who will be discussing her experience with the Bamboo Care She Trades Impact Fund, and Rachel Whitaker, the head of SI Research for Rabico, who will be explaining their gender approach and strategy. So just to kind of paint the picture for you, we have a very big player looking a lot at listed equities, and then also an impact player. So we thought this would provide an interesting overview of the different approaches that can be taken on gender lens investing. So let's start with Rachel. Rachel, can you please introduce yourself and Rabico, and just give us an overview of the approach that you're taking to gender lens investing?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm the head of the SI research team at Rabico, and Rabico's a global institutional asset manager headquartered in the Netherlands, but the SI research team is based here in Switzerland, so I'm in Zurich. I've been working in sustainable investing for 15 years now, and during that time I've had the privilege to work on the launch of two gender lens investing public equity funds. One in a previous role there was an index tracker, and the other one is the Rabico SAM Global Gender Equality Fund. It was launched in 2016 and it's an actively managed fund. The research team is involved in creating the eligible universe for the fund based on gender equality data, as well as a range of core sustainability factors. And then we have experienced portfolio managers who are constructing a portfolio with around about 60 names, and those are selected both for their strong investment fundamentals as well as a strong gender equality profile.
Great. Thank you so much for that overview. Now, Aisha, over to you. Same question. Can you introduce yourself and CARE, and then just talk to us a little bit about or super high level overview of this fund and how it came about?
Sure. Thanks, Kaylee. It's so wonderful to be part of the GLIS anniversary on Women's International Day with colleagues from Alpha Mundi and Gender Smart and Rabico as we showcase ways to achieve gender impact and generate financial returns. So I'm Aisha Khanna. I'm the managing director of CARE Enterprises, a for-profit subsidiary which serves as the impact investment arm of the global development nonprofit CARE USA. We were so glad to participate in the SAGE 4.0 report, and I'm just excited along with this group to reflect on the findings, to talk about where the field of gender lens investing is going, and then to share our progress as we raise a gender justice impact fund in South and Southeast Asia called the CARE She Trades Impact Fund in partnership with Bamboo Capital, Suzanne, as you mentioned, based in Geneva, and with advisory support from the UN agency, the International Trade Center, and their She Trades platform for women entrepreneurs. I might just pull some threads from the SAGE project to describe a little bit more about our fund as we reflect together on some of the findings. And I know we'll have a chance to dig into this a little bit more, but it's so encouraging to see the growth and evolution of impact funds with the gender lens. So we're raising a $75 million blended finance open-ended investment fund. So we're leveraging philanthropy and mission-aligned investments with the first loss capital tranche in our capital stack. And we're also raising a technical assistance facility alongside our fund that's tapping into gender experts in country, in CARE in Indonesia and Cambodia and the Philippines. So it's just good to see the evolution. Suzanne, you mentioned about various alternative fund structures, from collaborative pooled funds to evergreen and to blended finance funds like our fund. We also are a debt fund, and we see debt with a gender lens as a really exciting emerging asset class in South and Southeast Asia and in other frontier and emerging markets. So we're seeing this demand as we are doing diligence on businesses where entrepreneurs have traction, they don't have access to traditional financing, they don't want to dilute their equity. So they really are seeing debt as critical for them to allow them to grow their businesses and then to be able to access traditional financing. And we're seeing that demand on the ground in sustainable agriculture and renewable energy businesses and WASH and healthcare, essential services, financial services, so e-commerce. So it's very encouraging to see other types of capital beyond private equity and venture capital. We're excited to be part of that leading movement. And you saw that in the slide slides from SAGE, the 4.0 project. So I guess I would just wrap up to say I think this report and the field is continuing to grow with lots of new entrants. Certainly the COVID pandemic has had an impact on fundraising. When you look at the 13 billion of capital to raise, and we're about halfway there with these funds, Suzanne, so there's lots of opportunity. And now is an even more critical time to deploy capital to build these inclusive, sustainable, profitable businesses. So we are ready, I think, a field that's ready to put this kind of capital to work with a gender lens. But I'll stop there. I know we'll have a chance to dig into some of this as a group, but wonderful to be part of the conversation.
Thanks so much, Aisha. And I think, this is really, your fund is really a Building Bridges-esque fund where you have International Trade Center and International NGO Care and a finance group. And so we're always a big fan of that kind of collaboration. And now I want to dig into the details with both Rachel and Aisha on exactly kind of how the process works and what this looks like. So what is the investment philosophy behind your gender products, or even just the approach you take in general? To what extent is the gender topic integrated into the investment process? And how do you go about that integration? How does it actually happen? So let's start with Rachel, and then it'll be the exact same question for Aisha.
Okay. The basic philosophy of the Rabico SAM Gender Equality Fund is to try and advance social impact by investing in companies that advance gender equality. But I think it's worth touching on how the public equities gender lens investment approach is different to the private markets. If you're investing in public equities, you're primarily focusing on corporate gender equality. If we think back to Suzanne's slide earlier, the primary focus of most public equity funds is that impact on women in employment. And that's largely because that's where we find the data that's available to be able to construct this type of investment strategy, where institutional asset managers like Rabico feel that they have the most influence with these large companies to try and drive change within those organizations. So I think, my personal view, I think there's no question that from a pure impact perspective, investing in venture capital and then private equity and private debt gives you a more rapid way to drive a wider range of social impacts. But I think from an investment perspective, having options available in public markets means that investing in this theme is much more available to a wider range of investors and allows us all more diversified asset allocation options as well. But then just briefly to touch on the factors that we then include in our universe construction, coming at it from this corporate gender equality perspective, we're looking at whether companies have diversity policies, the representation of women, both at board level and throughout the organization, and not just the kind of absolute levels, but how the organization is retaining women through the seniority pipeline. So what if they have a very large number of women in the whole organization, but if they don't have that representation at management level and at senior management as well, then they're not offering equal opportunities to everyone in their workforce. We're looking at equal remuneration, both where the companies are transparent and what those pay differentials are. And then we're looking at a broader range of issues like their efforts around employee engagement and what they do around health and well-being in the workplace. So all the factors that we know are most likely to keep women in the workforce. Those are fairly, I think, common issues to look at within this type of strategy. We look at them kind of normalized by region and sector and size, so that we limit our eligible investment universe to the companies that are in the top 50% of their group. But we then apply various exclusion criteria, as I mentioned, including excluding all fossil fuel companies and some more typical sustainability exclusions, but we also avoid having the companies that have the absolute worst scores on broader sustainability topics, because we're very much here positioning gender equality as one of the key sustainability factors within our overall approach.
Amazing. Thank you, Rachel. I think it's really helpful to have this public markets perspective as well, because I think, you know, definitely in our network, in the GLIS network, there's groups who are working at both levels. And so it's very helpful to have this information. Thank you so much for that. And Aisha, same question to you.
Well, it was so interesting to reflect on the various definitions of gender impact and the way that that is evolving and changing and becoming more holistic. Not surprising, right, in a dynamic and growing field. So for us at the CARE She Trades Impact Fund, gender impact is foundational, and we've developed a holistic methodology from the ground up. So based on expertise from our teams in Indonesia, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Australia that have been working for decades with corporations and nonprofit coalitions and governments to impact labor laws. So CARE has deep expertise in best practices and policies and how to embed those policies to achieve gender equity, to economically empower women. And our fund's thesis is to apply that gender lens throughout the entire value chain. So we're looking at women workers, Rachel, a lot of what you're talking about, you know, in terms of the key metrics and equal pay and a pipeline of women representation, disaggregated data. And I'll talk for a moment about gender-based violence and sexual harassment because that's foundational. But workplace metrics, as well as metrics with consumers, feedback loops with women consumers, ensuring that the goods and services are actually impacting the economic status and opportunities of women and their families, and then rippling that impact all through the supply chain with women-owned businesses. So we're really looking at a value chain perspective as part of the CARE She Trades Impact Fund. Just two things I might mention that we've been very thoughtful about and have fully integrated in our methodology. One is we've incorporated addressing gender-based violence and sexual harassment as mandatory for all businesses in our portfolio. And we think not addressing these issues is a risk to businesses and funds. At CARE, we have a lot of evidence on the impact on productivity and retention and talent acquisition of not building safe and inclusive work environments. So this is a core part of our definition of gender equity and impact, and is mandatory for all of the businesses in our portfolio. And CARE has done research around the costs of not addressing this issue. In Cambodia, we did a study on the garment industry that showed that the annual cost was $89 million in lost productivity, staff turnover, absenteeism. So we think this is core and fundamental. The second thing I would just mention is that we have focused in a very intentional way on the intersection of gender and poverty, focusing on low-income women, and gender and climate. And so we have fully integrated climate metrics as part of our impact methodology. So gender impact is our North Star, foundational, but we have incorporated the real markers. 80% of our portfolio will advance climate mitigation and adaptation metrics. And the reason for that is women, particularly low-income women, are most vulnerable to the impacts of COVID and economic distress and climate change and the lack of financing as they attempt to grow their businesses. But they're also the solution, as women are more likely to pay back loans on time. They're a less risky investment. And so CARE has shown this with our Village and Savings and Loans programs and cash programs. So we think investing in women all along the value chain, in addressing that intersection of poverty and climate, is going to achieve the greatest impact and build good businesses, just good business practice. So that's how we've approached our methodology. And of course, it aligns with the 2X Gender Challenge framework. And we're part of the network of funds as we share how to show that we can accomplish deep impact and financial returns.
Can you hear us, Rachel?
There are very few public markets funds that have both a climate and a gender lens integrated. And I think out of 60 or so, I'm only tracking 3, quite honestly. And so, and I look at, and I always talk about Rabico as one of those examples. But I also think that the example that CARE She Trades and other funds is setting by looking at the products and services, looking at the supply chains, looking at the end customers, could really move over to how public markets vehicles are really evaluated. And when you look at a Unilever, or when you look at an Engie, for example, and you say, I'm looking at this public company, could I go beyond looking at employment and look at the products and services? And are they really gender responsive? Can I look at the customers? Can I think about the supply chains from these companies? And I know it's hard because we don't have the data yet, but that's one of the things that I'm really hoping could be. And then also, how are those companies engaging with companies like the ones that Ayesha is investing in, and even the funds like CARE, and really coming in as limited partners, coming in as investors, coming in as partners with contracts. So these are some of the things that come up for me, but I'd love to know what comes up for you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's really critical that we, investment funds like our one, but also similar ones in the market, don't just stop their gender lens inputs at the universe construction. So we create the eligible universe, but then the next step, which is the stock selection, it isn't blind to all of that gender lens input. And that's where we are able to do much more fundamental research and look at some of the topics where you can't necessarily get systematic data on. But I think sharing information and sharing experiences across the public and private markets is a great way of trying to identify what are the most relevant things that we could be looking at. And it can also help in building engagement cases. And that's basically the area in which we think that we can have the most impact through public markets investing. So we have a large engagement team that has a dedicated diversity and inclusion engagement strategies this year. So they are looking to be able to do deeper dives into individual companies to identify the issues that they want to encourage companies to make progress on. And I think in building those engagement cases, we can get the most insights from looking at the private market approaches to inform those direct conversations with companies. And I think it also demonstrates to companies, if they're aware that gender lens investing approaches are not just in the big of institutional asset managers, but there's also this huge market in the private equity and debt and in the venture capital space that's often much more on the ground driving change. It could also open their eyes into what they could achieve within their own operations.
Yeah, Rachel, I would just say I love that vision, and I think the shared learning, and we are seeing data and sharing that data that's emerging. I think we have a strong business case to make across private and public, and I think it's a really exciting time in the field. So thank you, and thank you, Suzanne, for painting that potential.
And I just think within Switzerland, within the coming back to the GLIS initiative,
yes,
that opportunity to cross-pollinate between the private capital and the public markets funds and the private markets funds is just so powerful. And Tim, I'm glad you're back on screen, because I just think this is part of why your vision coming to light and why I'm so excited to be helping you to do that is so important. And you're the first of any country to have a countrywide gender lens investing strategy. And given what a powerhouse financial center Switzerland is, I think you could really lead the world around this.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. And also thank you for stepping in as technology failed. It's great to have extra speakers because the conversation just goes on. That's amazing. We have a couple of minutes until the top of the hour. I wanted to give maybe the panelists the opportunity for one last comment. If you want to share some of your aspirations or targets for this year, or events that are coming up, or publications that you think are worth mentioning, starting with Ayesha, then Rachel, and then Suzanne.
Well, our aspiration is to raise this fund and contribute to this field, and to see gender lens adopted across impact investors and investors at large, and not to see gender lens investing as a silo, but actually foundational to building resilient, sustainable, inclusive businesses. So that's the aspiration, Tim.
Well, we join you there, 100%. Thank you, Ayesha. Rachel, what about you?
I think in terms of the aspirations for this year in the short term, supporting my colleagues on this active engagement approach that I mentioned, that's really ramping up this year, is a key one. And I think that this kind of investment strategy can raise the issue up the agenda of large corporations. And I even see that internally, at Rabico, that having this kind of fund really raises awareness within the company. We've seen kind of more internal initiatives to provide networking opportunities and to promote diversity within our own organization. So I think the same potential is there to do that with the companies that we invest in.
Thanks, Rachel. Really appreciate that. Suzanne?
Well, I just published a piece, Tim, today about where I hope within the next 10 to 20 years we'll go as a financial industry. And I think that looking at the three of you, you are like, how can we multiply you by thousands of people who really get it in the way that you get it? And how can we have country strategies, public market strategies, private market strategies, public investors, private, really getting on board and doing something and thinking both at the same time, how can I deploy my capital now with more strategic intent and more impact and more velocity, but how can I really be thinking about shifting the system and what am I doing to shift the system, as I think all of you are going beyond your own funds. So that's my aspiration.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's really a great way to end this first year anniversary of GLIS and the webinar. I see Sandrine has appeared. I don't know if Sandrine, you want to say a few words. Just one last comment from me. In the editorial of the SFG newsletter, Sandrine very rightly mentioned the impact of the Ukraine crisis. And while it's very distant in some ways, and the financial industry is limited in what it can do to a certain extent, especially in sustainable finance, I felt it was important to take action. And so we've partnered with the UNHCR, and you'll find information on our LinkedIn page about donations for Ukrainian refugees. And Alpha Mundi will match the first 10,000 Swiss francs worth of donations made through that link. Alpha Mundi is focused on Latin America and Africa. We've been doing impact investing for more than a dozen years. We don't have any business ties to Eastern Europe, but we do feel that it's important to take what little action we can, given the scale of the crisis. With that, I will pass the word on to Sandrine. And again, thank you to SFG for the wonderful support to the GLIS. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody, for this wonderful session. I wanted to thank our three panelists before, even if we had few problems with technology. They had such an inspiring discussion and conversation that even without Kelly, it works super well. So it was really great to hear you, and maybe answering one question that Suzanne Beagle had about how do we expand the field of gender lens in finance. One very concrete proposal, and it was for you, but not only for you, Suzanne, would be to invite you to the next Building Bridges edition, beginning of October, to be one of our keynote for the summit and talk about sustainable finance and gender lens. Okay, with those words, thank you very much to everybody, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.